All right, so from last time, from our discussion from Tuesday, we were talking about how to put a system together. One reason why you want to do something like that is not to put a completely brand new system together, but to figure out how to upgrade your existing computer so it is more capable, but without having to spend all the money to buy a brand new computer. Because right now I'm using a Q6600 system, which is getting a little bit dated. Okay, when I do certain things, it's just a lot slower than my laptop computer, which does not even have a very fast processor by today's standard. So instead of spending money to buy a brand new computer, then I have to move all the software to the new computer. I'm just going to upgrade my motherboard and also the processor and the RAM, because all those things are tied in. You cannot just upgrade the processor when the new processor requires a new socket, and then you have to get new RAM as well, because the new processor also requires a different type of RAM. So in addition to putting a brand new system together because you need a new computer, sometimes knowing how to do stuff like this can also give you the option of upgrading only certain components of your computer to improve a certain aspect of performance, but not necessarily getting a new computer altogether. Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with our discussion last time, which is circling around we were talking about Moore's law, which talks about how the performance of a processor doubles every 18 months. They thought they ran out of steam, or Moore's law ran out of steam about, every year they thought they hit the end already, that they could not continue the trend of improving performance, or doubling performance every 18 months. And they're still making, progress with, this Moore's law, which I think is really quite impressive. Okay, being able to keep pushing the envelope of technology the way they have for the past when I was in graduate school, it was in the early 90s. Okay, so in the early 90s they were already talking about how it was not possible to make transistors less smaller than 1 single micron. 1 single micron is 1,000 nanometers. And the current process, or the current semiconductor process, can make transistors reliably down to 22 nanometer. 1,000 nanometer versus 22, we're talking about a factor of 40. So what was thought to be impossible by the academia was now completely broken. Okay, we're making transistors 40 times smaller than previous thought in the 90s that it was impossible. Okay, so I think people will find, or companies will find, new ways to continue this trend just because there's a demand to do it. Okay, just because there's competition. If Intel is the only computer processor company, maybe progress wouldn't be so fast. But because they have AMD and also some of the overseas competitors, they have to keep pushing the limit of technology and basically get the next generation ready. Are there any questions? Yep, go ahead. The singularity, which is a black hole?
No, the computer singularity.
I do not understand singularity in that context. Okay, go ahead.
I think singularity you're talking about is where
2046, where computers are supposed
to be smarter than human operators.
I think they are already more capable in different ways. So the question is, which aspect of the human being are we talking about?
forget it.
No, that's not what it is. But the trend does continue. But one thing that computers cannot do at this point is they cannot write their own programs. There are learning algorithms that can learn certain things, but it has to be within a fairly restrictive type of environment and problems. So they can learn things by themselves and be able to apply what they have learned, but it has to be within a fairly narrow limitation of confined problem space.
Can we get the roast?
Yeah, I'm going to wait a little bit. Just remind me again in about 15 minutes so that people who stream in later can also put their name on the row sheet. All right, so what we'll do today is the first thing we want to do is to basically say, knowing Moore's law, okay? How do you make a decision to buy a faster processor as opposed to saying, okay, I want to save some money right now and not purchase a fast processor right now, and I'll save the money to purchase a faster processor later when it is cheaper. So which one is more economical? That really is the question. So to answer the question, we'll go to newegg.com, which I spent a lot of time at, over the past 2 days because I just ordered, components to upgrade my own computer. So that's a good thing, okay? It's a good thing. And I just hope that this trend does not continue. Every time I teach this class, I've spent a few $100 to upgrade my system. Just because I'm at the website and just could not resist. Oh, this processor is now available. Or that processor is now, used to be $1,000, now it's only $300. I need to upgrade my computer again. All right, so what we'll do is we'll first take a look at processors. So you go to computer hardware on their website, and then you go to, once again, go to, processors, where is it?
Right there, CPU processor.
CPU, there you go, okay. And once again, I do not, make any money out of, using the Newegg website, in the class. There are other websites like that. I think CDW is one. What are the other alternatives? Go ahead.
Tiger Direct.
Tiger Direct is a big one too. Anyone else? I think Amazon sells, computer components as well, but their search engine is not as good as, this one.
Amazon doesn't usually tell you the technical specifications of what you're buying.
Right.
You usually have to research ahead of time what it is.
Yep.
But Newegg will tell you everything about it on
Right.
the site itself.
Yeah, and also Newegg is located in California,
Yeah.
so shipping is really fast. Yep.
One reason I use, sometimes I use Tiger Direct because they don't charge tax in California, but Newegg does.
Newegg has to because
Yeah, they're located
it's
in
based.
California.
They are located in California. I think they're pretty close to the city of industry. They're located in the city of industry. Isn't that to around South San Francisco?
Somewhere. Usually if I order from Newegg, I usually get it in like 2 days.
Yeah, without having to pay for expedited shipping and stuff like that. All right. So last time we were here already, we were looking at processors, desktop processors. And here, you have a selection, based on what type of processor you want to use. You can basically go by, any particular, search criterion. Here we have the CPU socket type. Okay, the CPU socket type is kind of important, especially when you're putting something new together and you want to find out, okay, can I upgrade the system later, and what options do I have, if I choose to upgrade the system later, or do I have a wide selection of processors? In this case, it is really clear which socket type is the most common. LGA 1155. Okay, LGA 1155 is the most common one. It outranks the second one, which is socket FM1, by almost 4 times, 400%. Okay, we have 47 processors of LGA 1155. Let me just highlight the one that I'm talking about. So 47 processors, available with this socket type, and the second one, or the second type, the second most popular socket type, only has 12 alternatives. So that really tells you that if you choose LGA 1155, as your socket type, you can start with something that is probably very inexpensive today if you don't want to spend the cash upfront, and then later on you have the option to upgrade your computer to a faster processor. It gives you a lot of choices. So let's go ahead and just click that one and find out what type or what is the price range with that particular processor type. LGA 2011 only has 4 options, and I can tell you right away because I did the research already. They're all super duper expensive, and so are the motherboards.
I think they're for servers.
They're for they're extreme versions of the i7.
Like the
So the six
3930
core.
and 3960.
Yeah, the 3900 series. They all have 6 cores and 12 threads, and that's why they have a much larger pin count, because they need a wider bus to memory in order to keep all 6 cores fed and so that they can be doing something. Okay. And by the way, the numbers, LGA 1155 versus LGA 2011, that number is the number of pins of the processor chip that has to be in contact with your motherboard in order to function. So we are talking about 1,155 pins on a single processor that has to be in contact with your motherboard in order for the processor to function. The second one is even more extreme. We're talking about more than 2,000 pins, 2,000 little points, contact points, to make contact with your motherboard. If one of those pins is not making contact, it doesn't work. Yep.
Why would the LGA 115 be more upgradable in the future than something with more pins?
It's because the 2011 is intended for what they call extreme applications, so they don't make as many variants for the 2011 variant. So in terms of upgradability, yes, the 2011s have better performance, for sure.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the pricing. We'll take a look. Okay, you will look at the price and go like, oh, okay, so that's why we don't go there. Okay, but the point is, you're correct. They do have better performance, but they're not as popular. There are not as many people buying that, and I think that will be the trend. I think Intel will not make the consumer grade or the middle of the line grade to the 2011 socket type.
Is that because it's so expensive?
Well, they have to make a differentiation, and two, yes, it is. The expense is a part of the equation too. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the expensive ones first, and then we come back and look at the one that is more reasonable for a regular person to purchase. Okay, so we are now taking a look at LGA 2011. It has this particular one has. Let's see how many cores does it have. I think that's only a 4-core one. Quad, yep. And then the other ones are hexa-core. They have 6 core. Like this one, it says right here, it has 6 core. And then this one also has 6 core. So all of these are really super duper type of processors. They're not intended for server use. The ones intended for server use, they're called Xeons, Xeons. That's the variant for server use, which may have the same socket type, but these are for regular desktop use. Yep, go ahead.
So this would be purchased by extreme gamers or like video production companies or something like NASA?
They would be, they're for, sorry?
I think NASA would use something else. This is basically just for people who want the best you can get.
Yeah, the best the money can buy, basically, yep.
This kind of process would be used for those who want future computer.
Not really that much, okay? Okay, I can understand the concept of trying to be future-proof so your system can last a little bit longer. Okay, so let's take a look at the a particular one. Let's take a look at this one here. Okay, this is a 3960X. So what we'll do is we'll look up Tom's hardware and look up that i7. Which one is that? 3960.
This is the X.
And this is the one with the X. Okay. So there we go. And then we'll take a look at the performance. So this is one thing that you can do as well. When you are considering buying a new processor, you can also do research like this. Yep, go ahead.
I read an article about a year ago that said that Intel and AMD were both working on octa-core.
Octa-core, yep. There are some really kind of interesting considerations. You can increase the number of cores, but you also have to make the rest of the system improve in order to utilize the extra cores. Yep, go ahead.
I had an octa-core in my computer for about 2 months, and it was the first gen of the AMD, and 3 of the 8 cores blew up in the first 2 months of using it.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did you overclock?
No, I didn't overclock it at all, because I was
So
afraid to.
you're just running stock and with a good heat sink, and it's still blowing up? That's not good.
The 8150.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, did you raise your hand? No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that they've had octa-cores around for about at least 3 years now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the overall performance of those octa-core, processors is not any better than the quad-core from Intel. So, so it's not the number of cores that matter. It's really the overall throughput of the system that really matters. Yep.
I believe AMD and Intel also have 12 and 20 core for
the
servers.
servers, right? Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say that when dual core was first coming out, I ended up buying a special motherboard that let you do multiple cores
Mhm.
before the Intel dual core was really out.
Right.
And I ended up getting like 3 AMD processors and putting them in, and they were each clocked at like 3 gigahertz each. And they didn't work as well actually as some of the other high performance ones that were designed later on to be together.
Yep, definitely. When you have cores, on separate locations of your motherboard, you almost instantly lose, performance unless your memory system is designed to handle that. Because, anything that's on the motherboard instead of on the chip itself just requires more time, there's more latency, more delay, and stuff like that. So having multiple cores on the same chip definitely helps. And they can also share, the cache and a lot of the stuff that is localized and improve the performance that way. I just want to point out one thing, the number of cores is only helpful when the throughput is improved as a result. In other words, you're thinking about buying a car, okay? So if you buy a car, you just look at the number of cylinders. Is that a true measurement of the performance of the car? No. Because they have had V8s, in the past that can be blown away by a 4-cylinder today. Okay? And how about displacement? Is that a true measurement of the performance of a car? No. Okay, because now you can have a 2-liter, 2-liter as a displacement engine that can output 200 horsepower. Okay, and in the past we can have 6-cylinder engines that cannot even put out 200 horses or 200 horsepower. So it's not the number of cylinders, it's not the displacement that really determines the output, because there are many other factors determining the efficiency of the engine and also the peak performance of an engine. Translating those terms into computer cores, the number of cores is kind of like counting cylinders. Okay, you have a lot of cores, but it may not be very helpful because a lot of other factors determine whether the overall throughput of the system is improved or not. One of the limiting factor when you have multi-core on a single chip is, can you feed instructions to each processor fast enough to keep them busy?
So it's better to have less cores.
If your memory bandwidth, in other words, if the communication between the processor chip and your memory is slow to begin with, having multiple cores, is not going to help. It's not going to make it any worse, but at the same time, it's not going to help all that much. And that's why, with the really high performance type like this, you see a lot of pin count. In other words, you see a lot of pins. It's because you have a wider path or a higher throughput from the processor to memory. And that's how you can keep it up to, keep all the cores, busy. Otherwise, all the cores, 4 out of your, 6 cores can be waiting for like, okay, I'm just waiting for the memory bus to be ready to get my next instruction to execute. Okay, the amount of time to get instruction, if it has to go all the way out to actual memory, compared to the execution time of the processor, is huge. Okay, we're talking about a factor of at least 10, if not more. Definitely 10. Definitely, I think it's a lot more than 10 too. So the processor can be waiting, doing this, and just waiting for the memory bus to be ready to feed it the next instruction to execute. Okay, the instruction comes in, execution is done, and then it goes back and wait. So you have to improve a lot of things in order to utilize a multi-core processor to improve the overall throughput of the system. It's just like with cars. I'm not sure how many of you are car enthusiasts, but most people probably understand that internal combustion engine require oxygen and fuel, right? And after the combustion, you have to get the exhaust gas out of the tailpipe too, right? So imagine the intake of your Corvette or super high performance engine to be like this big. Okay, so what would happen to the engine? It has all the cylinders, it has all the displacement, it has every other thing that is needed to improve the performance of the car as a whole. But if your intake only has a cross-section area of this much, it cannot breathe fast enough. Okay. In other words, it's the same as giving an athlete, okay, an athlete, a face mask to limit how fast that person can breathe. And then you say, okay, go run that 100-meter race as quickly as you can. Halfway through the race, that person is going to faint. Because that person will use up all the oxygen already and just collapse, right? So it's the same thing with processors. If you want to improve the performance, you have to improve everything else to help support the processor. Yep.
One of the issues with having multi-core is that it won't necessarily show performance gain because the software itself
It depends on
has
the
to be
software.
written to utilize the extra threads.
Exactly, and that's why
And a lot of the majority of software still can't utilize more than a single thread.
yeah, that's a problem because it's a software issue, and we can buy the best hardware, and all it does is to say, I'm going to use one single core. Then what are you going to do with the other 5 out of a 6-core processor, right? So, and that's why when you look at the benchmarks, they do benchmarks on different things, so that it gives you a general idea of, okay, with the thing or with the game that I want to play, is this going to be a better performance or better processor compared to other choices that I might have? Because you may be paying $800 more than what you need and not get any performance gain at all. Yet at least not with the software that you're using. Okay. So what I want to do, which one do you think is a good one? I don't play games, so I cannot really comment on these particular. Let's go for media
3.
encoding. Sorry?
For the games, Battlefield 3 would be the most intensive.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, this one?
Yeah.
Now, with gaming, it's a little bit different too, because it also depends, the overall throughput also depends on the graphics card. So it depends on what they're measuring. So in this case, they already have the benchmark of different types of processors. Different configurations. 1 card, 2-way SLI, and 3-way SLI. And these numbers are benchmark numbers. The higher, the better. So this means, if you only have 1 graphics card, your performance is only about 1/3 of when you have a 3-way SLI or 3-way graphics card configuration. So are there any questions? Yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the top one has the lowest clock speed.
The top one has the lowest clock speed, exactly. Yep. The clock speed is kind of like the peak RPM of a car engine. Okay, just because a car can rev its engine to a higher RPM does not necessarily mean that it can output more horsepower too. So all of these things, they are kind of interesting numbers to look at, but by themselves, they're not really that meaningful. You really have to look at benchmarks, basically equivalent to race strips. Okay, you put a car on the race strip and you just say, what is the 0 to 60 miles per hour time? So you're actually putting everything as a whole system into consideration and not just focusing on one little aspect of an engine, of the tire, of the transmission. You're looking at the entire system here. So are we doing okay so far? Let's look at another benchmark, which I think is probably better if you are just looking at the processor itself. So we'll be looking at media encoding, which in most cases are really just using the processor. Sometimes it can also be using the graphics card as a co-processor. So here you have a much better idea of how much performance am I gaining by using a faster processor.
How many graphic cards can you have?
I think 3. I think 4 is the
Thought it was
most
4.
that's supported on most.
If you have 4, super high-end graphics cards, you need a power supply that is capable of more than 1 kilowatt.
So you're talking about
Because one takes up
how
about
many
200 watts already, and then plus the processor and then the peripherals. So you need something that's more than 1 kilowatt as a power supply if you have 4 of those high-end graphics cards, which is kind of crazy.
It's overkill.
Yeah, it draws more current than a toaster at that point. Yep.
It needs more rails too. The power supply needs more rails to power it.
Right, it needs more separate rails. Otherwise, the rails will start to interfere with each other. All right. So here you can see the comparison. The first one is a hexa-core or 6-core processor. The second one is a 4-core processor. And you can see that the performance of the first one, this is actually measuring in time, so the shorter or the smaller the number, the better. The one that is on top is definitely faster by 2 seconds out of a minute, slightly more than a minute, okay? Which is usually imperceivable by a person, okay? 2 seconds out of 1 minute is not really that perceivable. So we'll go ahead and look up the price too and see how much you have to pay, for this. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take a look at the pricing. So right now we are looking at the most expensive one on the page up to this point, which is $1,068. So we'll go back and then we'll go look at the other processors. We'll look at the LGA 1155, which has 47 choices, which I think is more reasonable. You can also sort by pricing. So we can look, we can sort by price, lowest price listed first. And that will give you a general idea of, oh, if I want to go for this type of socket, and right now I'm really short on cash, I don't have the money to buy something that is super duper, you can spend $50 and buy a processor chip that has really mediocre, performance for the time being, okay?
So basic.
You're just buying time, okay? You're spending $50 right now instead of $200 or $300 to buy time, and when you do have the need of the performance, then you look up at that point and say, okay, at this time, what is the best processor to buy based on price? Okay, so we'll go down this list and find the processor. This one here, the i7 2600K. Okay, so let's see. We can always just look up 2700. Not on this page. So let's move on to the second page. Not there either. Okay, we're getting close.
At the top.
Yeah, that's a 2600, not a 2700.
I think it was 2600.
Oh yeah, 2600. I got it wrong. Okay, so we are looking at something that's okay. The K version is $320. So we are talking about $1,000 versus $320. Let's just call that a 3 times. Okay, so it's closer to what we can easily deal with. So is the other one which is costing 3 times as much as this one, worth the price when if you use it only for encoding purposes, it's only going to be faster like 2 seconds out of more than a minute? Probably not, right? Okay. What if you're using it for some other purposes? So you have to kind of go through what you want to use the processor for and evaluate it based on all of those things that you want to do. So let's say you do want to play a particular game. Okay, pick another one. Crisis 2 maybe. Okay, let's do that one. Okay. So I'm just keeping this tab here when I switch back this one to look for the performance of the 2600K.
There was a direct comparison at late 21 on that page between those two processors, it looked like.
You mean here?
Yeah, go back to that where you were selecting the table of contents for that article.
Oh, you mean?
He's talking about the main benchmark page of the.
Yeah, for this.
There was a direct article comparing both processors and a multitude of.
Oh, okay, I see. So right here, there's a link to it?
Yeah, it's
number 21.
Right there, I can see it. Okay, cool. So this is a direct comparison. And you can see that with certain things, you have, you see a 25% improvement, 33% improvement, over the other processor. So it depends on is this one of the things that you are doing? And the second thing is, can you perceive a 33% improvement when it comes to the performance of your processor? Some people can, some people cannot. It depends on what you're doing. If what you're doing is something that you will normally take a day, yes, that 33% is going to be significant. Because what used to take 24 hours will now only take, 16 hours? Okay, so you'll be measuring in hours in terms of how much sooner the job can be done. On the other hand, if you're playing games or things that will only take like a few seconds in general to complete, it's not going to be that perceivable. Okay, so even if we take this particular example here, 33.5% in terms of SolidWorks, I think is a rendering kind of software. Is that what it is?
CAD.
Is a CAD? Okay. So, is it worth the money? Well, then it depends on, are you talking about at work, or are you talking about you're doing something at home that is not in a professional type of context. Now, if you're doing something at work, time is money. Okay. So maybe the time that is saved is worth the extra cost of $600+. Okay. On the other hand, if you're doing this at home and it's not in the capacity of making money, you're just doing something on your own, maybe it's not worth that $600+ dollars to get only 3% of improvement. Is that okay so far? Now, 33% or 1/3 of performance gain. How does that translate in terms of time? In other words, if you just sit and wait, how much time on the average do you have to wait for the overall performance of processors to improve 33%? We know Moore's law says every 18 months it can double. So in order to improve just 33%, how much time would that take? It's not 1/3 of 18 months. It's a log kind of thing, so you have to look at the log curve and then figure out at which point it is 1/3. I would say it's only a couple of months. Okay, so the question is, if you just wait a couple of months, you will probably get the same performance for the same price. Okay, I'll put it this way. You can spend $600 more. You can buy a $1,000 processor today, okay, instead of a $300 processor, and realize the 33% performance gain right away. Okay, you get to enjoy it right now. Or you can wait 4 months, okay, and spend $300 and get the same performance. Would that be a good way to look at it? Kind of. But that's basically what you're looking at. Okay, you're looking at how much money do I have to put up front in order to realize the performance gain right away, as opposed to waiting a little bit in time and spend a lot less money to get the same performance gain just because technology is improving. So that really is the bottom line. Yep.
So why would you do that when at that time something even better than what you were waiting for already came out?
Right.
That for a certain price that you're.
But the price point is going to be the same. In other words, to get that last 33% of performance gain, you always have to pay $600 or $700 more compared to $300. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I think that's how they price it. Okay, what determines the pricing of these processes? How come one is $300 and the other one is $1,000?
Cost of production.
Cost of production is one factor, but that's not the only limiting factor, or the only determining factor in this case. Yep.
What they can get away with.
Exactly. Yep. It's a free market.
Supply and demand. Demand is high.
Supply. Yep. Go ahead.
Supply and demand. So, demand is high, so they're able to offer more. If supply is high, then they're able to sell it for less. That's why they
Right.
like bargain.
In this case, it is demand driven. The high-end processors are all demand driven. Okay. In other words, people are willing to pay that much more money, in order to gain that 33% of performance. Yep.
Several questions. One, aren't these benchmarks under ideal conditions versus real-world conditions?
No, these are real world. These are actual real world, test cases. In this case, I think they're transcoding, or depending on the application, you can click on the application and they will tell you exactly what they're doing.
Are these benchmarks, can we get them ourselves and use them in our own personal use?
You probably cannot install every single one of these, programs in order to test it. Some of these are open source, and yes, you can do it on your own. But some of these are not, open source or free, so you actually have to pay money to buy that software just to run your benchmark. Yep. Go ahead.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
Is one benchmark better than another, or are they specifically designed for certain hardware or software?
Oh no, these are actual, real life, real life applications. Handbrake, I think, is a transcoding software for audio. Is that what it is?
That's a video. That's a video transcoder.
Okay, so it's a video transcoder, but nonetheless, it's a transcoder of kind. What is main concept? No idea. iTunes, we know what iTunes is. Visual Studio, okay, we know what that is. It's a software development, package. So in that case, the gain is only 5.3%. In other words, if you work, if you're a boss, if you're a supervisor, and then you have, your employees, coming to you and say, boss, if you just buy me the top of the line, computer, I can improve my, work efficiency, and you will end up saving money. Then you can look at this chart and go, no, I don't think so. I don't think that 5% is going to compensate for the $600 that I have to spend, extra just for the processor. When we look at the motherboard, you will see, a whole different story as well. Yep.
I noticed with like the 7-zip, WinRAR, and 3-zip,
Yep.
that they all kind of fill the same niche, but they have significantly different benefits from.
One can benefit more than the other
Yeah.
one. Yep. Go ahead.
I think it's due to the fact that WinZip is very inefficient, WinRAR is more efficient, and then 7-zip is actually the most efficient zipping
Utilizing multiple cores, right?
Yeah, it's highly threaded.
Yep. So that's basically answer the question. One software, WinZip, and I have no idea why people still use WinZip today. I mean, I can understand 7-zip and WinRAR because they can do other things, but WinZip, I have no idea. But WinZip basically is a single-threaded, program. So it doesn't matter, whether you're running out of 1, 2, 4, 6 cores, it's going to be the same speed. The edge here, which is 1.5%, has to do with the improved cache probably of the hexacore chipset, because it just has a bigger cache and bigger memory throughput compared to the other one. And that's the only reason why it has a slight gain in terms of performance. And you can see that lame doesn't improve at all. There's no improvement whatsoever. And do you guys remember what lame is? Lame ain't MP3 encoder, which is what it is. Okay, so that software is completely single-threaded and has no locality to make use of the cache efficiently, and therefore it has no efficiency gain whatsoever in terms of no performance gain whatsoever. Fine reader, what is a ABBYY fine reader? I have no idea. But this is a rendering software. SolidWorks, is a rendering software or a 3D CAD type of software. So I think they're measuring the rendering time, and it sees the most improvement, which is really impressive. A 33.5% improvement over the other one is exactly what you would expect when you're improving the number of cores from 4 to 6. Well, no, I take it back. That should be like 50% of improvement, not 33%. Yep.
The Abby is the original character is known as character recognition. Is this what the Abby is?
I don't know what it is. Do you know? Oh, we can look
Yeah,
it
it's
up.
original character recognition. It's a writing a word thing.
Oh, okay.
And it changes it.
It's an OCR. Okay. It's a what we call optical character recognition. So it's a heavy-duty type of processing. There's a lot of processing going on with that type of software. And the design of the software
I use it on
allows
my iPhone.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty good. Not bad.
Very good. Thank you. All right. But the bottom line is still, go ahead.
What's further down the screen, do they have another set of programs they tested?
All right, let's scroll down. So this part is average performance compared to the i7, which is 2.
So it's a different processor on that.
Yeah, this is a i5 2500K, which is even less expensive compared to the top of the line, the 3660. So we are looking at, this one is, you can see a 50% improvement with the more expensive one, but the price of the i7 or the i5 2500K is even less than the 2600K of the i7 series. So basically, this is what you need to know, in order to find out, okay, is it worth that kind of money to get a performance gain of this much, depending on what I am using the computer for. Okay. So if you're not using, the type of application where you see a lot of performance gain, the extra money that you're spending is not going to realize any type of, actual gain over a less expensive but nonetheless, capable processor. So over here, you can see and many of these are out of stock too. Okay, let's pick one of these, and we'll just pick this particular one to take a look, because I think this one is a fairly popular processor. And we'll go over some of these, specifications just to kind of understand what we are talking about, or what these techno talk, techno babble is really about. I'm not going to explain it in the actual technical sense, but we'll kind of talk about it in the sense where you can just understand why is that number significant. Yep.
If you scroll down into the details, you can see all the technical specifications of the processor.
Okay, so that's good. Okay. Brand, series, and model, those are all, really just for identifying the processor itself. Socket type. Now this is important because when you buy a motherboard, you have to make sure that the motherboard supports this particular socket. As far as I know, all motherboards in production right now can only support one type of socket. There are no motherboards that can support multiple sockets.
I believe AM3 socket is actually backwards compatible with AM2 and AM3 Plus.
Okay, so AMD intentionally make that decision to make it backward compatible.
It's unofficially backwards compatible.
So if
you need a BIOS update.
Okay. I hate those things that's unofficial, which basically means if something blows up, it's not my fault.
So when you buy a motherboard, you need to make sure the processor and the motherboard are compatible with one another.
Yes.
And
so that's.
Is there an adapter that you can buy?
No. You don't use any adapting a processor to the motherboard. Yeah. You want direct contact, as direct as possible. Yeah. Because we are talking about 1,000 pins, or sometimes even 2,000 pins, or 2,000 contact points on the processor chip. If you put any type of adapters in between, the chances of having one missed connection is increased. It's the square, right? So if you miss one pin, it's not going to work. And that's why there are no such thing as adapters. And besides, the functionality of the pins cannot be translated either, so there's no way to adapt a processor of a different socket type to a particular motherboard. There's no way to make it work.
So it's in one's best interest when they want to upgrade the motherboard or the processor to buy the most popular motherboard or processor.
Well, that's one factor. The popularity at the time is one factor to consider. The second factor to consider is, is the manufacturer in the process of transitioning from the old socket type to the new socket type. Because if you read the news and you say, oh, Intel is now, promoting the new socket type, then it's not a good idea to buy the old socket type, even though it is the more popular one at this point. Because if you plan to future-proof your system and want to upgrade your processor in the future, then you need to look at, okay, what will be the popular socket type within the time frame that I want to keep this motherboard. Now, yeah, go ahead. You also have to remember a motherboard is not necessarily very expensive. They range from around $50 to $60 and up. Okay, you can go all the way up to like $500 or more. But if you are doing something only for general purpose, you can spend maybe $100, $150 and get a reasonably good motherboard. So you have to look at that as well, is to say, am I going to spend too much money on the motherboard to future-proof the design, even though I can just switch the processor socket type as well and get a new motherboard, because a new motherboard is not necessarily that much more expensive either.
I was going to ask, who controls the market, the motherboard manufacturers or the processor? Sounds like Intel dictates what is in vogue or is new at that time.
Go ahead. I'll let him answer the question first.
Yeah. Intel and AMD both have their own socket types that they like to use, and basically Intel and AMD determine the chipset that the motherboard manufacturer uses for that particular motherboard.
Well, it's driven by the manufacturer. It's driven by Intel and AMD because there's a necessity to go from 775 or 775 pins to 1155 because of the redesign of the processor. Okay, so that really drives the necessity of a new socket type because with 775 pins, they cannot do certain things that can be done with the 1155 socket type, the LGA 1155 socket type. So that's why it's that part is driven completely by the manufacturers. The motherboard companies really do not have a say in the matter.
Another question: between AMD and Intel, it sounds like there's only two major processing companies. Are there others, or just those are the only two?
I think VIA, used to make some Intel or instruction set, compatible processors, but they are not really a main competitor of any sort, in this particular market.
Mostly just Intel and AMD.
Yeah, it's just Intel and AMD, and Intel is still much bigger than AMD.
Is it a friendly competition between the two, or is it a cutthroat competition?
It's a cutthroat competition when it comes to the design and the how to make things work better. But when it comes to production volume, there's no comparison. If Intel was to die today, and say, okay, this company just ceases to exist completely, AMD cannot possibly fill the market. People would just be unhappy because they cannot buy processors. Because AMD just doesn't have the production capabilities to fulfill the market that is left over by Intel dying.
Is it a marketing scheme, or is it an actual design, a detailed design with the chips that if you looked at them head by head, this processor speed versus this processor speed, or is that just a marketing ploy to get us to purchase one or the other?
I think AMD have more quote-unquote cost-effective processors, and Intel has higher end type of processors. If you look at the high end type, I think Intel it really occupies every single slot with the high end processor. When you look at the lower end processors, AMD is very price competitive for the same performance. Like the octa-core processor, it's not expensive. How much was your octa-core?
I think it was. Go ahead. It was about when it first came out. It was only like $200.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they can tout and say we got 8 cores, whereas for the same price with Intel you can only get like 2 cores, maybe 4.
So if you looked at AMD and Intel, one is 3 gigahertz, the other is 3 gigahertz. What are the other factors that we should look at?
Well, that's what we are going to go through here for. So those are the things. Those are all specs. In other words, you're looking at the displacement, the number of valves, the number of cylinders and stuff like that. Your overhead cam, single overhead versus double overhead. So we're looking at individual pieces of technology that is put into the design of the processor or core engine. But the overall performance, is dictated by how these things are put together, not just the numbers. Okay, so we'll go through some of these. So the core type, is usually a code name. Ivy Bridge is basically just an entire family of cores, and that has a lot to do with the process itself, which will be shown a little bit later on. Multi-core, this one has a quad-core processor, which means there are 4 individual processor cores inside the one single chip. The name, okay, that's really just a name. Operating frequency. Now this one is kind of interesting because the i5 and the i7 processors have what we call a turbo mode. A turbo mode is kind of interesting because it depends on how hard you're pushing the system already. That number may not be relevant at all to some people. Okay, it's basically based on the processor looking at its own operating environment, mostly temperature, current, and stuff like that, and say, can I operate at, in this case, 3.9 gigahertz just for a short period of time? Okay, because when the core temperature of a processor increases, then the processor core will basically say, okay, I know I cannot switch to turbo mode at this point, and it will just maintain the 3.5 gigahertz operating speed at that point. So in other words, to realize the 3.9 gigahertz turbo mode, you need to have good heat sinking capability to basically keep the core as cool as possible. Then the core will say, oh, I got a lot of leeway in terms of temperature, thermal dissipation, and I can just increase my operating frequency to 3.9 gigahertz and give you that extra 10% improvement, for as long as you can maintain the thermal dissipation. So if you use the stock cooler with the processor that comes with the processor itself, you may not be able to realize that much because the stock one is not very efficient in terms of getting rid of heat. Okay. It's kind of like running the turbo, the turbo of a car. Okay, you cannot just say I want to run that turbo all day long. Okay, if you're running up a hill and you have a car that has a turbo, keeping that turbo running all the time, it's going to be taxing to the engine because the engine will run hotter. Your engine oil will break down faster because they will be hotter as well. Okay, so there are many factors that basically says turbo is only good for the short run, but you don't want to keep it engaged at full speed over a long period of time. And it's the same thing here. That's why they call it turbo, because it's not supposed to be a full-time thing. It's only supposed to help you out when you need that processing power, but not sustained, not in a sustained way. DMI, I think, determines the bandwidth to memory. So this one can do 5 giga or 5 billion transfers per second. Okay, so that basically determines how quick your processor can communicate with memory. Now that is important when you have a multi-core design because, as I said a little bit earlier, you have to be able to keep all the processes working by feeding them instructions, all at the same time. Level 2 and level 3 cache, they're basically, here to alleviate the necessity to talk to memory. In other words, for things that are frequently needed, it will try to keep it to the cache, which is really, really quick to access. And for infrequently accessed items, you still have to go all the way to memory to access. So the larger the cache is, the more likely that you can keep things in the cache and therefore increase the overall performance of the system. Okay, so you want to look for something that has more cache because that will be beneficial. Manufacturing technology, this is a 22 nanometer. In other words, one transistor is going to be about 22 nanometer by 22 nanometer. The smaller this number, in general, the higher the performance of the processor and the lower the power consumption. Okay, so this has to do with power consumption as well as the performance of the processor. 64-bit support, basically just says, does it have a 64-bit mode, so you can use an operating system, that has a 64-bit supply. With most of if you buy a processor like this, most likely you want to run a 64-bit operating system to begin with, because that's how you can address more than 4 gigabytes of RAM, and most games and high demand applications require 4 gigs of RAM or more. So that would be a good feature to have. Hyper-threading improves the capability of each core to handle multiple programs at the same time. Okay, so it is not necessary. Yep, go ahead.
It basically splits each core into multiple threads.
Into multiple logical threads, but not physical ones. In other words, when it actually comes to computation, like actually adding, subtracting, multiplying, and stuff like that, you still only have one core to do it. What the hyper-threading is doing is saying, switching between different threads is a lot more efficient. So it's a virtual kind of thing. It's not, So if you have hyper-threading, your software, the operating system, will think there are 8 cores. But out of the 8 so-called cores, only 4 are really actual cores. So you can only have 4 actual computations going on at the same time, and not 8. But to switch between the different programs that are executing at the same time, that switching time is improved a lot when you have hyper-threading. And that's why when you have hyper-threading, you're not actually improving the overall throughput by 100%, which is what you think it would be, right? It's only improving it by maybe 10–20% at the most, because it's just improving the ability to switch, but not necessarily the actual processing of it. Is that okay or not? Okay. Integrated memory controller, dual channel DDR3 memory controller support DDR3 1333 and 1600 memory. Now this part is important. Okay, this is determining what type of memory can be supported by the processor. Okay, you want this number to be as high as possible. Okay, because the higher this number means it can support faster memory and therefore improving the efficiency or the performance, number of transfers between the processor and memory. So that's a very important type of thing. Virtualization technology support. It is important only if you want to virtualize or run virtual machines on your computer. You will find applications or times when you think, oh, okay, it would be nice if I can just run a virtual machine. I just ran into that situation recently. Since I'm going to upgrade my desktop machine, I actually run 2 servers in the house. 3. I'm running 3 separate servers, physically individual servers in my house, plus my own desktop computer. So there are 4 desktop boxes running basically 24/7 in the house. Okay, now that takes up a lot of electricity. Okay, so with my new design, when I'm improving my desktop computer, I'm going to virtualize 2 out of the 3 servers. So physically they will be in one single box. So the power consumption overall speaking will be improved a lot. Okay, I'll be saving a lot of electricity just by combining several boxes into one single one. But in that case, virtualization technology support is important, because without that, it'll be very slow. It will be very inefficient. But with this, I can have the pretense of multiple individual machines, even though I only have one physical machine, and I can do it with efficiency. Are there any questions about virtualization? Because I know that's kind of like a more kind of technical type of thing. Go ahead.
Are you running a server in your house because you want it to be fast with all the computers? Or I thought like a server was basically for like when you have like a business.
I have one server for email, so I run my own email server and my own domain name, which is not really used a lot anymore. Like drtech.org is actually my own domain, and that's my own website. So I run that server. It has been kind of deprecated, because I've been moving my material to other servers. And then the Moodle server used to be in my house. Okay, so what you guys currently use as moodle.lostreals.edu used to be someprofs.org, which is one of the physical servers that I have in my house too. So those are the 2 servers. So I guess I only have 2 servers, and then my desktop, that are running 24/7. But the drtech.org right now is running a Pentium 4 processor at 2.8 gigahertz. So it runs hot, but with very minimal performance. And that's why this is the first one that I will virtualize, because it's taking up all this power, heating up my room, and not really doing a whole lot. It's like constantly turning on a heater that is about 200 watts in a room. That's not useful as a computer. Yeah. So that's why virtualization is an important factor in my decision when I purchase a new processor. Integrated graphics. Now this is really just a code name. This part requires a little bit of explaining too. With the Intel I series of processors, the video chipset, or the part of the computer that determines how to draw something on the screen, when you play games and watch movies and stuff like that, it's on the same die. It's on the very same chip as the main processor chip itself. Okay, and this is the code name of the one that is included with this particular processor chip. Now that is kind of an interesting thing, because some people do not care about this at all. If you are a gamer, you look at this and go like, I don't care about that, because the performance of the on-chip video chipset in these processors is not that good. Okay, if you're just watching YouTube, yeah, it's gonna be okay. If you watch Blu-ray, it'll be fine too. If you play casual games that is not very demanding, I'm pretty sure it will work just fine. But if you try to play any games that has a lot of 3D rendering and stuff like that, this will run out of gas like right out of the box. Okay, you install this chip and then you install your games and go like, how come my frame rate is so low? Okay, I have the top high-end processor, but we are forgetting the video card. Okay, the part that is responsible to render stuff on screen.
You have to actually update your video drivers to run any games when using those graphics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's actually more cumbersome.
It's like two updates. In order to even
Two
run any
updates.
games straight.
Oh, moly. So, if you don't care about this because you have your own video card, like NVIDIA video card or ATI video card, all these numbers are not really that useful to you anymore. Okay, these three lines, integrated graphics, base frequency, and maximum dynamic frequency, they're useless because you would just be disabling this by using your NVIDIA card or your ATI card. Yep. Question?
No.
No? Okay. So I just want to kind of find out, what type of video cards you guys run, especially those who play a lot of games. How many people use NVIDIA? And how many people use the alternative? AMD. Yep. Yeah. Huh?
AMD's now.
Yeah, AMD owns ATI now,
Yeah.
so that's basically the same.
Used to be ATI.
Used to be, yeah, ATI, and the family is called Radeon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now this is an important number. 77 watts as what we call a thermal design power. In other words, with this particular processor, when you're running it at full speed, everything you're running at the same time and trying to consume as much power as possible, the heat or the thermal output of this processor chip is equivalent to a 77 watt, basically, incandescent light bulb. Okay, which you may not think, wow, 77 watts. What is 77 watts? It's not much, right? Well, it's not much when your light bulb is like this big. Okay, if you touch a 77 watt light bulb, regular light bulb, you will still get your finger burned, right? It's still going to be running pretty hot. Now imagine that the surface area of this device, whatever is producing 77 watts of thermal power, instead of being a light bulb and a 3D object thing, it's now about this big, about the size of your, I would say, maybe a little more than your thumbnail, okay? And out of this surface of, a little bit more than your thumbnail, you have to dissipate, you have to get rid of 77 watts of power. That's not easy, okay? That is not easy at all. And this processor, interestingly, is already one of the lower power consumption ones. Okay, in terms of power consumption, 77 watts is not much. My P4, my Pentium 4 processor probably takes up 150 watts all the time doing nothing. Okay, and so this is pretty good in terms of how much processing you get out of the energy that you put into the system. But this is going to be an important number, 77 watts, because how do we get rid of the heat as much as we can so that we can stay in the turbo mode as much as we can. Cooling device, heatsink and fan included, which means if you don't want to spend any extra money, you don't have to buy your own heatsink and fan. Okay, it is already included. But most of the time, the one that is already included with the chip, it does not give you the best capability to cool down the processor. So most of the time, people just buy extra, an additional heatsink, instead of using the factory supplied one. I have a whole pile of these, factory supplied, heatsink and fans, in my house, because I just don't use them. So, are there any questions about these numbers? And yep, go ahead.
Okay, so say I was gonna play like a game on my laptop, like one of these ones, and just
Okay.
play. But then, what's the difference? Is it just the graphics you're looking at, or because you can play games on your laptop, right?
Right.
But so what's the difference between if you put it on a faster one? It's just the
Okay,
colors?
with games, there are several things that you have to look at. One is, what is the level of detail when you look at a particular screen? Okay, if you just freeze the screen, how much detail is on that screen? That's one factor. With a high-end gaming system, they can render a lot of details. Okay, in other words, you can see reflections, you can see the effect of fog, you can turn on all types of things to make that particular screen, make that one single frame look very realistic. And then the second factor has to do with how many frames can you render per second. Okay, In other words, how fast can you refresh the screen when you're playing that game? Okay, so a high-end gaming system will be able to support way more than how our eyes can perceive stuff. So okay, I will leave it up to the gamers to kind of talk about the performance of your system. So does anyone want to tell me how many frames per second you can do with certain games?
I think with Battlefield 3, I do my frame rates at least 40 to 50 frames per second.
Okay, so 40 to 50 frames per second is already well exceeding what your eyes can actually perceive. So that's
high
good.
setting.
Okay, that's a high setting, but to you, does it look smooth enough, or do you think, oh, I want to double this, to make it smoother?
I play with ultra and high settings. I find that high settings just the perfect balance between performance and graphics.
Okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say that actually your eye, because of the way the video games are rendered, because they're static image, your eye can perceive a lot more than the 24 frames per second that your eye perceives during the movie when there's motion in each clip. So like the general rule of thumb is like 72 FPS is where your eye stops being able to detect movement.
So that's not, so the number is 72 or so,
Yeah, 72
not the
or so.
22 that we
Not
usually
24
use
that
for
video
movies.
runs at.
Okay, because they have more there's more detail on the screen, and therefore your eye can actually perceive the different frame rate differently. Okay, so does that answer your question? So when you play on the laptop computer that is not intended for gaming, you may get a frame rate of maybe 22, 30 frames per second. But when you play on a high-end gaming system, you can be up to maybe 100, 150 frames per second. So things just look a lot more smooth. Okay. Are there any other questions about the processor itself? Now the processor drives everything else, and that's why this is a very, very important topic when you're putting a system together yourself. Okay, so are there any questions at this point about selecting your processor? If there are no questions about the processor itself, we'll move on to the motherboard, okay, which is the next component. You don't really have to go to the motherboard right next to this, but I would just go to the motherboard first, and then we look at what each motherboard can do. So then we go to motherboards. I'm going to open a new tab, so we keep this one up because it is kind of important from time to time to have to go back to here. When you look at motherboards, they have AMD motherboards or motherboards intended for AMD processors. Since we are already kind of looking into an Intel processor, we'll just click Intel motherboards. And there are combos too, so we can definitely look at combos later on too. We'll do the same thing. We'll list the items. Okay, first of all, we can limit ourselves to a particular socket type. Unfortunately, they have, no, we can definitely do that. We can just go to LGA 1155. And when you look at the motherboards or the support of different types of socket types, you can see that the LGA 1155 is by far the most popular or the most supported socket type, at least today. Okay. And that's another reason why I would hesitate to go for LGA 2011 or 2011, because there are only 47 motherboards. Now let's just go there first and just check out the prices of motherboards that support LGA 2011. Yep, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I bought a storage, and inside one of the storage I bought, it had a motherboard for a Mac. Can you sell that? Without getting in trouble?
Motherboard for a Mac?
Yeah, it's in a plastic, like metallic, kind of like plastic.
Yeah, it's static. Yeah, anti-static discharge.
I was wondering
I don't think so, because Macs are entirely different. I don't think Macs even have the same form factor as a PC.
weird stuff all over.
Yeah, Macs are completely different. If you're putting a PC,
Give it away.
unless you have a Mac, that you are repairing so that you can replace the motherboard of that one, I don't think it's going to be very usable.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's go for the high-end one first, because this is not the one that it won't work. So right now, right here, you can see a motherboard that costs $2,000.
That's for a 10-pack.
That's for a 10-pack? Oh, that's why a 10-pack. But it's still more than $200 each, which is still expensive. And then you have one, that is at $600, and this is a one pack. This is one single motherboard for $600. When the other processor, the other quote unquote higher end processor is only $300, this motherboard is $600 right there. $400, 300 something dollars. So if I go, let's see how it's sorted. It's highest price first. Let's go for lowest price first. The lowest price one is $189, which is not inexpensive. Okay, that's actually quite expensive already. Okay, and you don't have a lot of choices. Okay, yep, go ahead.
Oh, it only has 2 eggs.
And it only has 2 stars. Yep, 2 eggs. 2 eggs. Yep, exactly. Exactly. And it's not out of one review, okay? If something has 1 egg or 2 eggs out of 1 review, you can just kind of say, yeah, maybe that person doesn't know what he's doing or what she is doing, and just cannot get the product to work and gave you 1 star. But when you have 11, it's starting to be indicative of the motherboard being maybe it's not something that I want to buy, okay? The next one is they only have a few that is within $200, and then it goes all the way up. So you don't have as many choices with LGA 2011. But if you switch back and use the other form factor, let me just switch back to LGA 1155, this one, we have 269 choices. And out of those choices, you can see you can buy one for basically $41, and out of 5 reviews, it has 5 eggs. Okay. The lower end motherboards definitely do not support as many features, but at the same time, if that is not what you're looking for and you just want to put a box together for general use, hey, $41 is a lot of money saved compared to $200. Okay. All right. So when you have already selected your motherboard, you can also narrow down based on manufacturers. You can also narrow down based on CPU type, Northbridge, and other factors. So when you go for more options, you have all these other things that you can use to basically help you narrow down your system as a whole. So we'll start with CPU type. So even though these are all LGA 1115, you can see that there are differences between options here. You have Pentium 4 / Celeron, which is probably not something that you want to look into. The Xeon one, the last one, is LGA 2011, and I don't know why it even shows up, in this search, because I thought we narrowed down the search based on LGA, 1155 already. Okay, so that's one of the factors. 3rd generation Ivy bridge, the one that we were looking at, this particular processor is a 3rd generation, so this will definitely, be applicable. You can see the other ones are also, i7, i5, i3, and those are all applicable as well. We'll go take a look at the North Bridge. What is the North Bridge? You see on the motherboard there's a bridge? No. there's no actual bridge on the motherboard. A North Bridge is basically a chip or an IC integrated circuit that is external to the processor to help it with the communication with other devices. Okay. In other words, if you look at just the processor itself, it can do computation. It has a lot of stuff built into it already. But when it comes to, let's see, expandability, if you want to expand your system, the North Bridge is what is going to interface the external or the additional cards, peripheral cards, to your processor. Are we doing okay so far with that concept? Kind of? Go ahead.
It's like the processor is the brain, and the North Bridge is the spinal cord.
Is it what?
It's your spinal cord.
It's the spinal cord. It's kind of like
connects
that.
Connects the nerves to
right. That's a good way to put it. Thank you. So if the processor is your brain, then the North Bridge is basically your spinal cord. There used to be a South Bridge too, but a lot of times those are all kind of integrated now, and the South Bridge does not really matter as much. So you have all these options. Basically you have high-end ones and lower-end ones. I think the Z77 is the high-end one. Is that right? Okay, if you don't know what these numbers are, don't worry. So we can look down the other ones too, because you can get to the same place, based on the other selections. PCI Express is a way to expand the capability of your computer. In other words, you can plug in additional cards to your motherboard to make it do more things, down the line or right off the bat. What kind of things do you want to plug into your motherboard to expand its capabilities? Yep.
Well, the times 16 is really only for graphics cards. Nothing else really. Times 16.
I think graphics card is one, but I think if you have a hardware RAID card, that's also times 16.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I got one that is competing with my video card. So I think you can get a RAID card that is also a times 16 card too. But video cards are definitely times 16, to make it even worthwhile. So if you want to expand your processor, if you want to put together a gaming system, these are important. PCI Express, they are times 16. Now the version is 2.0 versus 3.0, and this one is probably implicitly 1.0. I would go for the more recent standard if possible. So if you click that, it shows that 123 motherboards can support one times 16 or what we call 16 lane PCI Express cards. 46 motherboards can support up to 2, and 19 can support up to 3, 4 can support up to 2, and interestingly, there are 6 that can support up to 5 16 lane PCI Express cards, which I think is pretty impressive. Okay, so how do you choose which one do I want to use? Well, first of all, how hardcore are you in terms of gaming? Okay, are you willing to spend a lot of money on video cards? If you're saying, well, I'm kind of cheap, I'm going to spend up to maybe $100 on video cards, one is going to be good. Okay, it's going to be enough. And you might want to consider 2 just in case you want to add something else to your computer. If you're thinking, I will spend as much money as possible to improve the gaming experience, then you're looking at 2 or more for sure. Okay, because you can put 2 video cards into the same chassis and use the SLI link capability so that the 2 video cards can work together to render graphics on the screen. 3 I can see because you can actually link up to 3 these days. Is that true? Does anyone have 3 high-end video cards in one single computer? Okay.
My uncle has 4 in his.
4? Okay. Is he running kind of any type of like simulation programs?
He runs like lots of rendering programs as well as.
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, because rendering programs can also utilize the graphics card to offload most of the processing to the video cards. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, but in that case, it's a production kind of thing. So if he can improve the performance of his system, he'll be saving time and therefore improving the profit margin. So it does make sense in that case. So there are people, who will go for the 4 and the 5, but if you're just, a regular gamer, 2 or 3, should be enough. And since I'm not even a gamer, 1 is already enough. I'm going to select 2, just so that I have 1 slot left for something else. Now this part here is also important. We're running out of time. Okay, we'll just finish this part first, and then we'll continue next Tuesday. This part is kind of important because you can see that most motherboards support 4 slots for memory, and that will help improve the performance of the system. So unless there's a really good reason to pick the 2 slots type, you want to pick something that has 4 slots because 1, it is easier to expand the memory of your system later on because you just buy 2 more cards and you can then expand the amount of memory available. And 2, you can also potentially improve the performance of your system having 4 slots. The only reason why you want to pick a 2-slot one is because you want to make your computer really tiny. Okay, when we talk about the form factor of a motherboard, then you will understand. Oh, you mean a computer doesn't have to be this big all the time, and sometimes it can be like just a little cubicle, a little cube to make it very small and concealable in your room. Okay, so we are running out of time, so we'll kind of stop here for now, and then on next Tuesday we'll continue.